Hey everybody, it's me, Derek DC Phillips, bringing you all things frightful. And today I want to talk about a much anticipated release, Hocus Pocus 2. Now, yesterday I posted a super short with some initial reactions from my fellow watch party members, and it sparked a little bit of conversation in the comments. I've been seeing the same types of comments over and over on different social media platforms, Rotten Tomatoes, about Hocus Pocus 2, but also about certain legacy sequels and reboots in general. So I started to have more thoughts than I initially thought I would on this movie, and I wanted to share them with you. So let's get into it. For a bit of context, when the first movie came out in 1993, I was 3 years old, going on 4, if I'm not mistaken. And I did not see it until the following year, I suppose, when it came out on VHS. I wore that tape out. My mom actually had like a Halloween basket for me. Growing up, Halloween was always our thing, so it was sort of a big deal. Side note, I would have probably missed a family Thanksgiving before I missed a family Halloween. So that should tell you everything you need to know. I was obsessed with the first movie. And with the rise of certain platforms like TikTok, like Instagram, what have you, the movie kind of had a resurgence. I don't remember it being so huge back in the day. I mean, it was, but it turned into this thing almost like a Christmas Story, where it's the movie that everybody watches. There's a marathon all day long on the day of Halloween or leading up to Halloween. It just wasn't like that back in the day. So at some point, it hit cult status, and a sequel was imminent. Now, when a sequel comes out 30 years after the original movie, there are bound to be cultural shifts that are present in the newer movie that were maybe not present in the older one. Even just norms in terms of filmmaking. I'm thinking Psycho 2. I know that has nothing to do with a family-friendly movie like Hocus Pocus. In Psycho 2, there was more blood, there was nudity, everything was ramped up. Also, the movie's in color as opposed to black and white. There are just some natural changes that are going to happen when a sequel comes out 30 years after the first film. Nostalgia is a strong marketing force. And, watching the new movie yesterday with my friends, a friend had a watch party with some of her friends and the child of the friends. And I realized I was pulled into this movie for the sake of nostalgia. I'm not usually one of those who's like hashtag 90s kid, hashtag Disney kid, but this was a big deal for me personally growing up. Even if Hocus Pocus wasn't the massive hit it was anticipated to be back in the day, it was big for me as a spooky kid. So I will say this movie was heavily marketed toward mid-level to elder millennials, and I think we all went into this movie ready to love it and or sort of a mix of ready to pick it apart, whereas the actual children of our generation are loving it all throughout the movie. And I know the nitpicky stuff I've seen online about, oh, Kathy Najimy's mouth is over to the other side in this movie, why? And there are all these think pieces dissecting it, dissecting all of the Easter eggs. We, the adults, are going into this movie and looking for things we recognize and ready to be critical and taking that perspective of, I'm going into this wanting to be satisfied and see a genuinely good movie that gives me everything I'm looking for. When in reality, it was marketed to us, I mean our generation, but it's really for the kids. So all of these thoughts that were building up in my head, I have this mental list of pros and cons and sort of in between. But when I saw that my fellow viewing party member's child loved the movie and was actively engaged in the movie and afterwards said that it was very scary and very funny, I took a step back and I said, you know what? That's all that really matters. Even within more meta franchises with legacy sequels or reboots like Scream, there's been this push to shine a light on toxic fandom. And I think that's sort of at play here because People my age and around my age are going into this movie expecting one thing because it was marketed to us in fairness, but it's not really for us. You know what I mean? Having said that, in this video, it's not a true review, so no real spoilers, but if you are planning on seeing the movie, you just haven't gotten around to it yet, I would recommend watching the movie first before diving in here. I don't want to dash your expectations by being a Debbie Downer or anything like that, or by hyping anything up that you go and watch and you say, not really. In this video, I just wanted to share some observations that I made, especially under that lens of this movie being marketed to one generation, but really in actuality being for another. Having said all that, number one complaint that is popping up all over online is that it's too woke. Well, I have thoughts here, because anytime you see characters who swap gender, religion, ethnicity, race, and so on, there's going to be a hubbub online of trolls. Look at The Little Mermaid, okay? In this movie, if you're saying that the movie is too woke because the cast is not all white, I'm going to have to ask that we go ahead and just diverge paths on that argument. However, if you're saying that the movie was too woke in that it was a bit watered down on the scares and things like that, I can agree. I will say that I've noticed even cartoons, any media that's targeted toward children back in the day, like elder millennials back in time, we had some pretty scary and disturbing content for families and children. I mean, think about movies like The Watcher and The Woods. There was content that was genuinely creepy, and probably we lost some sleep over. I remember even being terrified by, what was it, Double Toil and Trouble, the Mary-Kate and Ashley movie, because at the beginning there was a disclaimer that said it was based on true events. Anyway, I did feel that the Sanderson sisters were a bit more cartoonish this go round. I think they did tone down the scary element a little bit. There were no souls consumed in this film. I guess that was a bit of a spoiler. But you know how in the first movie, they were terrifying. They actually kidnapped the kids and that kind of thing. There was some real danger there. So in that respect, I can understand if you're saying it's too woke because kids these days just can't handle the scary, then okay, yeah, fair enough. However, like I said, having viewed this movie with an actual child, she thought it was very scary. Product placement was out of control. This one, I am 100% in agreement. It felt like a Walgreens ad at one point, like for a solid chunk of the movie. They kept mentioning Walgreens. Even others who I watched the movie alongside were like, dang, I bet they didn't pay very much money to make this movie. It seemed like throughout it was pretty well sponsored. You'll pick up on that when you see it. But as an adult, a cynical adult, again, that was kind of a point where I'm like, oh wow, okay. But kids don't notice that kind of thing, I don't think. Easter egg overload. Depending on what you went in wanting from this movie, that could be a positive or a not so positive. I will say that there were a ton of Easter eggs that almost wanted to make the movie more meta. I mean, I couldn't really wrap my head around how the Sanderson sisters have become so legendary and iconic in this town in Salem that people would know exactly what kind of cape they wore, the exact colors. People in the movie are actually watching the first movie. I didn't understand how that worked. That wasn't thoroughly explained. Maybe I missed something, but in my opinion, that was a little bit almost distracting. I know we've got to suspend our disbelief for this movie no matter what, but for me, that was a bridge too far. Now, the Sanderson sisters themselves, I will say the three of them looked better than ever. There were times where I forgot that 30 years have passed, and when I remembered, I was shocked. So, seeing the three of them reunited in this movie, of course, that brought out the feels, as they say. But I don't remember the first movie being so musically inclined.
I have put a spell on you, and now you're gone.
Here, it's almost like the Sanderson Sisters were touted as some kind of girl group. I was confused by that. There were a few in-jokes, some meta-jokes that sort of touched on that, but for me, that was a bit much. I'm not a huge musical fan to begin with. I'm sorry. But for me, I was kind of wondering why there needed to be a musical number, mass choreography, that kind of thing at certain points. The Sanderson sisters were the only returning characters. I found that very interesting because sometimes legacy sequels will overload a bit. I do think there could have been more of a balance. If you are going to wait 30 years to give me a sequel, a la Psycho 2, I would like to know what happened to some of the original characters. I don't mean to be shady when I say this, but even watching behind the scenes featurette that came on as an autoplay after the movie, I believe on Disney Plus. I don't have Disney Plus. I was just watching at a friend's house. Don't report me. But I don't know that many of the actors have gone on to do many other things or are doing other things right now. So I don't know why we could not have gotten a few returning characters maybe who had stayed behind. I can totally understand why some of the characters would have wanted to move on, but you always have, like in the Halloween reboot timeline, whatever, there are people who stayed around, and I'd like to know what happened to them.
Yeah, no kidding.
As mentioned before, the Sanderson sisters did kind of take a back seat toward the end. They were not so scary. They're actually sort of lovable and goofy. And for somebody like me who's a horror fiend, I wanted a little more. I wanted them in their full-on scary mode, which I also thought about. When I was 4 years old going on 5, I didn't know who Bette Midler was. So I'm sure that played a lot into the fear that I experienced, and maybe the fear that children now experience watching the movie. They don't know who these people are. For all they know, they're real witches. But they were sort of put on a back burner. How some of the characters, even in the Scream franchise, have faded away or been killed off in favor of the new crowd. So it's pretty obvious that they are setting this up as, I don't know, like supernatural cheetah girls. I'm sure there are also people out there who will have a problem with the new group of girls dabbling in the occult, but it is what it is. You're watching a Hocus Pocus movie. It's about witches. You should have known better. I'm sure we will get a Disney Plus limited series, another set of movies, you name it. There will be merchandise, which I'm sure children will be super excited about. I don't know that I will tune in the next go-round. If they brought back some original characters, possibly. I don't see the Sanderson sisters coming back. I think that was their final hurrah and sort of love letter to the fans who have elevated the original movie to cult status in recent years. So, all in all, if you're looking for a cute family movie to watch this time of year, I say go for it. But if you are one of the older millennials who this movie was marketed toward, don't go in with super high expectations and don't be a toxic fan. Oh, don't forget to follow me on Instagram, on TikTok, but especially Instagram, because all through the month of October, I will be posting Fright Flicks recommendations. That's right. I will be posting one scary movie recommendation per day, and I don't think you'll want to miss it. I also want to know what you're watching this month. That's part of the fun of being on social media through October and hashtag spooky season.